everyone. I think we're going to start because it's time. People are still piling in to the room, to the virtual room, but we'll get started for those who came on time. And so I'm Caroline Isotier of Tech for Good Canada, and I'm going to be moderating this discussion with Tim Grant, who is my partner in crime here, who is an advocate on many issues, including the environment, and who started this journey with me to look at how digital is disrupting all aspects of our society, and in putting together what we called salons for the past few months, which were in-person events with very open discussion about different issues. And so now we've taken to the web to put these discussions online. And so Tim now will introduce our 4 experts, and then we will, he'll explain how things will run for this event.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the rules first, just to give everybody a sense of where we're going. Before I introduce our 4 esteemed panelists, as you may know, we've muted everyone, and we've also asked you to keep your cameras off for the time being. But when we do get to the question session, and we're going to start that quite soon, it's not you're not going to hear lengthy speeches from our panelists. They're going to respond to questions right from the get-go. So you will have an opportunity to ask a question. In fact, if you have one now, you can type it into you'll see the Q&A. If you bring your cursor down to the bottom of the toolbar, you'll see the Q&A button there. And if you click that, that will open up a window where you can type in a question. Caroline and I and Dina will all be monitoring those questions and relaying them to our panelists in but a few minutes. And when you're invited to ask your question, you're welcome to turn your camera on and your audio and directly ask your question. Okay, well, I'm really excited that we have the 4 experts that we have here today, although they may decline to call themselves experts, as many do. But first and foremost, Dr. Anne Cavoukian, who's in the bottom of your screen at the moment, is the former Information and Privacy Commissioner for the province of Ontario. Her concept of privacy by design, which takes privacy into account throughout the system engineering process, was expanded on as part of a joint Canadian-Dutch team, both before and during her tenure as commissioner from 1997 to 2014. She was subsequently hired by Ryerson University as a distinguished visiting professor after her end of 3 terms as commissioner. She was appointed as executive director of Ryerson's Privacy and Big Data Institute in 2014, and since 2017, she's been the distinguished expert in residence of the university's Privacy by Design Center for Excellence. No mistaking the connection of the name of the institute. She also heads the Global Privacy and Security by Design Center. So welcome, Anne.
Thank you.
And Dr. Ron Srigley is a writer and teacher. His work has appeared in The Walrus, the Los Angeles Review of Books, the MIT Technology Review, and Lobes, as well as a variety of scholarly journals. He teaches philosophy and religious studies at Laurentian University and in the School of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Humber College in Toronto. And he wrote, I asked my students to turn in their cell phones and tell me about living without them.
No.
Welcome, Ron.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And Ron has been a past panelist on one of our earlier eSalons. Great to have you back. Dr. Gary Hepburn joined Ryerson University in January 2020, relatively recently, as the Dean of the Chang School. He's also a professor in the School of Creative Industries, the Faculty of Communication and Design. He really is an expert in continuing education, education technology, lifelong learning, online learning, and open education. And he holds a doctorate, in curriculum and instruction from the University of British Columbia. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you, Tim. Pleased to be here.
And last but not least, Yasmin Razak is the director of the Center for Global Citizenship Education and Inclusion at Centennial College, again here in Toronto. At the college, Yasmin works with a team to strategically lead the integration of the principles and practices of an engaged citizenry and college community that reflects the valuing of global citizenship, human rights, social innovation, change-making, equity, and inclusion. Yasmin, that's a really tall order. I don't know how you quite do it, but this role includes the integration of appropriate curricular, co-curricular programming, social change-making, and policy development. She's currently, as well, completing her doctorate of education in higher education leadership. Welcome, Yasmin. And Caroline, I turn it back to you to give us some results of the survey you've conducted.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tim. Welcome again, everyone. Welcome to all the attendees. There's about 80 right now. And what we wanted to ask the attendees is, just to specify what Tim briefly mentioned, to put any questions that you have in the Q&A section, and then we'll get to them later. And also, if you want to use the chat section to introduce yourselves, or just say where you're connecting from and what's your connection with today's theme. Are you a student, a professor, an administrator? Just curious. Yeah, that would be great to have that in the chat as well. And for those of you who are on Twitter, the hashtag for today, it's a bit long, but hopefully you can master it. It's hashtag higher ed new normal. So if you're going to be tweeting about this, you'll see that on the Twitter handle for Tech for Good Canada, which is at Tech for Good Can. I have tweeted this today's event with the hashtag, so you can do that. And I just want to introduce Dina, who is the one with the nice background here, who is a fourth-year student at U of T, the video editor of the Varsity publication, and who will be helping us recording this, monitoring the chat, and also she will be putting together excerpts after we're finished so that those who cannot attend can have some sort of idea of what was said in this discussion. So I'm going to share my screen and present to you the results of a survey that I didn't introduce myself. I'm sorry. I'm Caroline Isotier of Tech for Good Canada, and I'm actually, I will stop doing that, but I'm actually the director of a young coalition of concerned citizens and professionals who are advocating for the use of technology that benefits our individual and collective well-being. And Dr. Kate Tilichek, who is a Canada Research Chair in Youth Education and Global Good at York University, is on the advisory committee. And she is on the call, I think. Our objective is more than talking about digital literacy. Our objective, now that tech is pervasive in everything we do and has invaded our everyday life so quickly, is not only to talk about digital literacy for all, but to talk now about the second step, which would be a critical digital literacy. So how do we make sure that we recognize that digital is not good in and of itself, that there's good and bad in today's digital technology? And that's why we were interested with COVID in looking at how the sudden move to distance learning at Canada universities had impacted students who were, and of course professors and administrators, but students are the ones that we interrogated in this case, to see how this impacted their ability to study, and of course, possibly their mental health, and how, because this is a time when, as we've been, we've all been adapting to online, where native online tech companies, whether it's Google or others, have the opportunity to step in and take a lot more control on our lives than they even had before. So we were concerned about how traditional institutions were adapting to this new situation so that they remain a strong voice in this new context, and they're not, they don't see they don't lose ground with respect to these pure online players who most of them or many of them are also American. And in the spirit of preserving Canadian culture, we thought it was interesting to see how this new situation might be impacting them. So this is a survey of about 300 students that we did online for about 10 days in early May. And we focused on second and third year students because we thought the first years would be highly impacted and the fourth year would be less concerned with the quality of education since they were graduating and they only had a few weeks left to finish. So we asked second and third year students, did studying from home have an impact on your ability to study? And we got a 2.9 response out of 4, so quite significant impact. Almost 3 out of 4. And from the qualitative results, we heard that when the students had to suddenly leave their residence and go back home to a place where sometimes they did not have a private room for themselves, not to mention the travel for international students, that this was highly disruptive. They also could not leave the home and go to a coffee shop or to a library to study, and they told us this was highly disruptive for them. We also asked them if they were financially negatively impacted, and there we got a 2.7 response out of 4, so relatively high again. And from the qualitative feedback, it came out that as all of you, a lot of you know, part-time jobs were stopped, and summer jobs in a lot of cases were canceled when they were not able to be switched to distance working. And so what happened at most traditional institutions is that classes that used to be in person, had to be administered remotely. And in some cases, in the rush, some professors sent material to the students who then had to take that material in, completely autonomously. So these are the classes where we say they did not move to online teaching. And so we asked the students what they thought of that experience versus the in-person offering. And not highly surprisingly, they answered 4.4 out of 10. So a below average experience for those classes that sent over material and that did not maintain a relationship between the professor and the students. And for the classes where it was possible to continue having online lectures, whether videotaped or synchronous lectures, we also asked them how they rated the quality of that experience. And this was a bit above average, so 5.4 out of 10. So given the rush in which this was done, this is quite understandable, but it means that for the future, there necessarily has to be a lot of adaptation done at universities and colleges who had not been set up for this sort of distance learning if in the fall COVID is still impacting us and impacting the way education, higher ed, is being delivered. We also asked them if exam content and weightings were modified to account for COVID-19. And in 86% of cases, they said yes. So, and they were quite satisfied with how exams were either canceled or modified to account for this extraordinary situation. So either it was transformed into group work or another type of assessment, or earlier work was given more weight than the work to be done after March 10 or something. Yeah, so they were relatively satisfied, 2.8 out of 4. We did get some qualitative feedback that in some cases exams were maintained, and they're what I think Gary calls proctored exams. I didn't know this term. So this is an exam where you're being watched during the exam for the whole 1, 2, 3, or whatever number of hours, taking the exam behind your screen. And this was very difficult, obviously, for some international students who were in Asia and who had to take these exams in the middle of the night. But in general, students were relatively happy with the way that exams weightings were modified. And we also asked, now this is of course a tall order for universities who had to adapt themselves, but given the housing, the financial, and sometimes mental health difficulties that students faced, we asked if they got, how they rated the support they got from their university, and there the response was 5.1 out of 10. So, average response, very understandable given the rush and the way the crisis hit everyone. And then we wanted to know, since there was a lot of talk about whether this was going to change students' minds about returning to university, given that they were not going to have this social experience that they had expected, we asked them, are you considering other options than going back to university in the coming terms? And 74% said, no, I'm returning to my university. 10% said online courses, 9% says they were going to get work if possible, and then 2% mentioned switching to another university or doing travel and volunteer work, 2% each. So we don't have a benchmark as to how many second and third year students were planning on returning to university in the first place. So this is just an indicator of where they were early May there. So very quickly, so this is when these results came up, and a number of articles came out in the Canadian media, but also in US media, and also to piggyback on, a trend that had been going on in universities for a long time, that Ron Strigley has written about the evolution of teaching at universities and colleges, with the increase in the number of people who are attending university and colleges, and also this, I don't want to say, we can say competition with online learning, so we wanted to bring you all together and answer some students and parents and professors' questions about what the future was going to look like given this context. There was an article, of course, out of the US, quite inflammatory, by Scott Galloway, who is an NYU professor, who was saying that there's going to be a shakeout in universities where there's going to be these huge cohorts going to online learning at some of the major, most connected institutions in the US, like Stanford and MIT, and smaller universities will suffer because of this. Just because not having the in-person experience makes a big difference for students, obviously. And the price, now that they're financially impacted, the price is a factor now in even more than before in going to university. Now this goes against what you've all been talking about before we connected, which is increased attendance at your summer sessions, if I understand well. I would like to know if that is a summer issue, and is that going to be prolonged in the fall? Are you seeing an evolution in students attending in the fall, or so that would be a first question to start with, and I think check the chat, because Dina is going to be putting some links in the chat, and yes. So maybe yes.
Caroline, I'll just jump in for a second before you continue with that question. We do have a number of questions already in the Q&A, which is great, but for those who didn't catch the instructions at the beginning, because I'm seeing questions also popping up in the chat where we're not going to be able to see them, I've tried to encourage a couple where I've seen the chats, a couple of the questioners to just copy and paste their question into the Q&A. And if you don't know where that is, to get to the Q&A, excuse me, you need to bring your cursor to the bottom of the screen to the toolbar where you'll see Q&A, and click that. That'll open up a box where you can paste your question in. That's where we'll be pulling the questions from, and we'd love to answer yours. So, sorry, Carolyn, back to you.
Yeah, that's fine. So I will, I think, open it up to those who are really, probably start with Yasmin and Gary, who are really in the middle of the action here. How did you manage the switch from offline instruction to online? So I don't know who wants to start at Centennial and at Ryerson University.
You can go ahead, Gary.
Thanks. You know, I think the word that comes to mind is frantic when it all began. In our case, we were completing, like everybody else, the winter term, and had to help everybody transition to this, which included helping many of our instructors who were working on courses, some of whom had online learning experience, some of whom had none, and to really put into account a manageable pathway and try to support them as they transition their courses. So our motto was keep it simple as we went along, and we tried to discourage particularly those who didn't have a lot of experience from trying to do too much at one time, but then again, to really understand what student needs were. Where it became really frantic is when we switched to spring and summer. And Ryerson runs a fairly large spring and summer session. And typically we have about 28,000 enrollments in it. Now, when the cancellation of in-person courses happened, we lost 60% of that, just disappeared. And our job was to increase for our fully online courses. I should say 60% was in classroom, 40% was completely online. So we had to increase the number of students we could serve with our completely online, and then do what we called a virtualization process, which meant we were converting classroom courses to ones that could be delivered digitally to students. And we used short courses as the formation of the transition for virtualization. So it was a short 10-hour course, which went over some basic principles, but also assisted with getting course plans together and communication plans with students. And so we got those courses going. As Caroline mentioned, that many of us noticed, enrollments were brisk. In fact, we set an enrollment record and went up to 33,000 enrollments overall in our spring and summer courses at that time, and became very quickly, in a matter of weeks, an online institution, at least for a while. So that was our initial experience, and now we're preparing for fall, but perhaps I'll leave that and hand it over to Yasmin at this point.
Thank you. Thank you, Caroline, for your great question. And I just wanted to reference that reading the Scott Galloway article as well, which was shared amongst our leadership. One of the things Centennial did really, really, really well in response to COVID-19 is kind of have a three-pronged approach. And the number one approach was supporting faculty at this time, giving them the tools, the strategies to ensure that the teaching at a distance model would be inclusive. And we do have a Center for Organizational Learning and Teaching, Center for Academic Quality, and right away, this was rallied around our faculty to ensure that they had the tools necessary to offer inclusive teaching. And what we did is we ensured that the approach did adopt a universal design for learning approach. And so students had multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, action and expression. And I think that was, we have always done that as an institution, but it was definitely heightened. And then one of the things that we were ensured to include is understanding that they were going through a global pandemic. And so how could we support and ensure that you know, one of the things our VP of HR consistently says is psychological safety of our employees and even for our students. And so we have seen an increase in our student life offerings and what we have prepared for our students during this time, because students are really thirsty, not only for knowledge, not only to understand how to increase their academic success, but how to ensure that they remain viable for employment, and also that they have the skills that's going to make them successful during a economic time of a global pandemic. And so I just think it was really admirable that Centennial has consistently, and even during this pandemic, has moved forward with their values rooted in equity and inclusion.
Right, thank you. Do we have, so I think, Tim, is there a question you want to bring up from the chat, from the Q&A, which is quite active? I mean, I have some questions on, I would have loved to have some specifics on how things went. And for example, one of the questions I had also for you, Yasmin, is just specifically, how did you, how was it, you know, what were the logistics and what were some of the difficulties, if you can share some of the difficulties of having professors who may not have been teaching online. How did you help manage that, and what are some of the challenges that you see for the future?
It's an interesting question because our Center for Organizational Learning and Teaching, which I'll refer to as COLT now, it's a long title, just held a faculty summit and asked that very question. And a lot of the answers were rooted in the support on how to create assessments that would be viable for online learning. And so rethinking assessments and what that looks like in an online platform, and also understanding if there were any curricular modifications that needed to occur, giving faculty the agency to do so, again, knowing that there is a support that the college could offer. And then also introducing new digital tools that were always there, but faculty may not have had to engage in it because there is a fear around technology. I think all of us can say that the rapid pace that this has put us in has required us to use technology, especially as a faculty member, at a different level. And, you know, from what we've seen is that the faculty have really embraced the use of technology, and so have the students. But noting that there is a digital divide, that some people have higher digital literacy skills and others have higher access to digital tools and technology. And so faculty are always mindful in creating their online learning environment that allows for maximum and equitable participation.
Did you want to add anything to that, Gary, or?
Maybe quickly and focus on a particular aspect. Assessments were mentioned. And this was one of I haven't seen too much in the media about it, but I can tell you from inside the institution, this was a major issue. Because of course, in the winter, we had planned many proctored exams, and these are the ones that are invigilated and watched. And the question became, with a few weeks remaining in the term, how do we replace those in the courses? And of course, there is software that can assist with this, but as we looked more into it, we became more aware, and there are many here who can speak directly to this, some of the privacy issues that are associated with that, that are really significant ones, but also just whether the technology is really able to guarantee proctoring. I think there's some larger questions because, and what we ended up doing, I guess maybe to end the story, is while we did need to have some proctored exam capacity, we strongly encouraged faculty to begin to consider alternative ways of assessing. So it could be using non-proctored exams, but other formats of assessment, which would be valid measures of learning and so on. But one thing that in the background that quietly happened is we found out that we didn't really have to run exams in most cases to actually evaluate student learning. And this is an interesting thing because universities have quite an exam habit, I would call it, at the end. But we did evaluate learning well, but we did it with other means. Given the anxiety that this causes students coming into it, and the fact that there are alternatives to examinations, we're kind of now left with the question, whether we're online or not, whether our examination habit ought to be re-examined. So there's certain things that have appeared, come up within this discussion that I think are going to be excellent discussion points, not only for online learning, but for institutions in general.
So, and then I don't know if Anne, you would like to step into the privacy issues or talk about your experience as a professor who already teaches online, I think, your privacy by design classes at the Chang School. So would you like to comment on some of those points, maybe?
Of course. And, Ryerson has been very respectful of privacy-related issues. In my online course, I mean, that's what I have been doing the entire time. So it wasn't of concern to me, obviously, because there was no COVID at the time when I started. And you have to have a slightly different mindset, I think, when you teach an online course, and ensure that there are ways to connect with your students in a live capacity. So I used to do that regularly. We'd have webinars where they would hear me and I could hear them and we could talk and exchange views. All of that is important. But the privacy issues are huge, quite apart from my course, because that was built into that. But now with COVID-19 basically ruling everything, the concern for the tracking and surveillance of personally identifiable data, in this case associated with students, is arising. And enormous protections have to be given to students doing everything online, possibly for the first time, and in an environment that they may not be comfortable with because this isn't their preferred mode of activity. So things may be said, views exchanged that perhaps wouldn't normally be conveyed. So privacy is absolutely paramount, that all of this information be very strongly protected. And sorry, were you going to say something, Carolyn?
I was just going to say how. Do you know how universities, I mean, I know you're probably a good advisor to Ryerson and to the Chang School, but how do you see this happening? I mean, what I see as a potential threat is with this rush from some universities, which are not necessarily here on this panel, obviously, who are maybe just really beginning their journey in terms of online teaching, that they might be charmed by tech providers, and that may not offer all their privacy safeguards that that one would want, or to have more just practical advice, more examples of how that could be implemented, because it seems complicated when you are, I mean, is the privacy, I guess privacy is on many levels. Is it the problem of seeing someone's home when he or she is connected to a class? Is it the problem of recording something that he or she may be saying that would not have been recorded before? Or is it access to that person's data through a software company that is now managing that person's data, and that is maybe not perfectly compliant in terms of privacy issues?
Exactly.
How savvy are major Canadian universities, really the big names, how savvy are they about this, and how are they going to make sure they preserve students' privacy going forward?
Never assume anything. That's what I always say. Trust but verify. Because I was going to say all of the above to the 3 points you raised, but definitely the last two primarily. Because when you're operating from home and students are in a room, of course they have to be mindful of where they are and what can be observed. I think they gain an understanding of that. But more the second and third points you raised in terms of information that's being shared with a software company that's offering assistance, unless you absolutely know what they're doing with your information. And hopefully they're not doing anything but what you contracted their services for, to provide delivery of a service or things of that nature. They shouldn't have access to any of the personally identifiable data relating to the student's activities or interests or performance. It's whatever you have contracted with them. And Ryerson's been very good on privacy. Obviously, it's paramount, and I've certainly tried to drill that home the last couple of years. But I think larger institutions especially can lose sight of, they're trying to get this thing done, get the courses online, get things moving. So they might not focus on the privacy concerns, thinking that they're secondary. And that would be a mistake, because the minute personal information ends up in the hands where it does not belong, the potential for harm grows increasingly, and it can come back to bite you. I mean, for the 3 terms when I served as Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, I saw things I simply couldn't believe that the governments would be doing. All of the governments, when I was commissioner, there was a different political party in each of the terms I served. And they were all for really strong privacy before they became the government. And then once they became the government, all that changed. And control over data became very important. So in terms of students' information, enormous protections have to be built in. Firewalls, if possible, encrypt the data if you have data at rest, so that it won't be accessible to hackers and unauthorized third parties. There's a number of measures that can be introduced.
How could a student or a parent or even a professor who's worried about this know what is going on at his university from a software point of view? Like, for example, I think you all know, because you're in this area, but our audience may not know, a lot of universities, to deliver this online content, have to use LMS, learning management systems.
Yes.
And I know there are a number of companies that do this. They also sometimes use Microsoft Teams to do the video conferencing. So there's all these different actors. It seems that it's challenging for a student to really know how he or she, how her data is being used by what company. And from what when I've looked at these LMS, there's one called Blackboard, there's one called Moodle, there's one called D2L, and I don't know if Ryerson uses D2L, which is a Canadian entity, but basically, it seems that should be part of the discussion, and that we should know, students should.
And Carolyn, and this can't be the responsibility of the student to figure this out and know it. I mean, really, please. That expectation is so unrealistic and unfair to students. The university has to ensure that these measures have been addressed in terms of where does the information go, how is it used, how is it accessed, is it restricted to the use as intended, which is always paramount. So the responsibility lies with the university to ensure proper privacy and security. You can't leave this up to the student. And when I created Privacy by Design many years ago, the essential nature was privacy has to be embedded into your systems as what I call the default setting. So it's automatically present. You don't have to have individual search for opt-out boxes for privacy protection. No, we deliver it automatically. That what must be the case here.
That seems to be the ideal situation, but even in looking at what is not today's theme, but which is a big issue, which is the use of Google Classroom in secondary and primary schools all across North America, it seems there are some issues with a student's data being accessed. But how do you fight free software, right? Because it's given for free. So
you have to have scruples.
Yeah. I don't know, Ron?
Caroline, when I sign in to Blackboard, the Blackboard system asks me to accept the cookies.
Right.
So even to get into that context, and then I decided to ask, to look a little bit further into their privacy arrangements, and you click on, and then you get lost in this series of links, which I think you've had people on your team looking into. But it's clear, what Anne said, that that the agreements are, they claim that the agreements are specific to the institution. So the institutions say to them what we will and what we won't allow you to harvest when you're into that context. So then they refer you, when you try and find out what's actually going on, to please go talk to your institution to find out what they've allowed us to do and what they have allowed us, what they haven't allowed us to do.
Yep. And
I wonder what Anne thinks about this too, because the business model of the tech companies is precisely built on the gathering of data for free, right? That's how it works, and to do so, without transparency. So you have a whole industry that is built on the assumption that they're going to do this as much as possible because that's how they make their money, and having it move up into a system where privacy, the opposite ethic, is precisely the one that's operative.
So I don't know if Gary wants to step in, because there is the Googles and then there's the D2Ls who sell their software. So we can assume that their model is not solely based on acquiring data. But I think everybody gets confused in this discussion because we hear a lot about the Googles and the Facebooks, and then there's these, what I call B2B, business to business software providers who sell their software and who normally, which I'm not positive, I don't know the answer to this, should not use students' data for other reasons, or should have limited access to students' data. And as long as universities can reassure their students in the use of their data, then it seems that could be a positive point for a student who is going to be learning online, to know that he or she is not going to be monitored by another company that might be monitoring their every move while they're doing this online learning.
If I might just jump in on that, one thing I would like to say in somewhat in defense of universities is that under normal circumstances, when software is acquired, especially major enterprise systems, there are some fairly rigorous assessments, and I know Ryerson does have this, and privacy would be one of those areas that is assessed. So they do take a hard look at the software and various considerations. The system is probably not perfect in capturing everything, but I think it is reasonably rigorous. What has happened recently is because we suddenly became so immersed in software and needed new tools that I think we're just catching up on the privacy concerns of what we've done. We did it extraordinarily quickly and are now beginning to rethink this. So I think there was a rush to just get the job done. And now I think we're becoming more reflective and considering what happened here. And did we open our students and our faculty who are working with them to privacy concerns as we made this rush. So I think we're kind of in that sober evaluation phase of some of the things that we did very quickly over the last few months. And this discussion that we're having here is very important and really brings up some of the issues that need to be considered at this time.
Yeah, it seems it would be interesting for students who may be considering other options, purely online options, to understand also the privacy concerns related to those options, if that is something that they are sensitive to, and we think they should be, despite the fact that they have nothing to hide, right, Anne?
If I could, please let me respond to that. It drives me crazy when people say, well, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, right? What's the problem with the state having access to all your information, or this organization? Are you kidding me? That could have been the motto of the Stasi police in the Third Reich, where, the state took all of the information, everything from the Germans. When that ended, Germany stood up and said, never again will we allow the state to strip us of our privacy and our freedom. And when I was commissioner, I went to a number of conferences in Germany. Every conference was started with a reference to that time, lest we forget. And it's no accident that Germany is the leading privacy and data protection country in the world, and continues to be, because of what they had to endure during that time. So let's get rid of if you have nothing to hide.
Yes, thank you. I think we've addressed the privacy issue quite well. I see a number of questions in the Q&A about more centered around learning. Did you want to choose one, Tim, to get us started on more the learning aspect?
Absolutely. No, there's lots of great questions here. Hopefully we'll get through a fair number of them. We'll start with you, Kate Tilachek. If you want to unmute yourself, perhaps even turn on your camera. You've asked about 3 or 4 questions, so I'll ask you to kind of not necessarily amalgamate them, but choose the one most urgent in light of the discussion so far.
Actually, I think we have to unmute Kate, Tim.
Okay.
And then she can talk.
All right, I'm doing that. Allow to talk. There you go, Kate.
There she is.
Thanks so much. Mine are mostly just follow-ups to some of these incredible points that are going on. And really the last one, I mean, we've known for some time with Ed Snowden and others that this architecture of oppression is there. It's already out of the barn. Now, my question is, what are post-secondary institutions going to do to make transparent to Canadians and citizens and students and parents what might have already become problematic in our privacy? And is there any way to put the genie back in the bottle now that all these contracts have been signed? How will students know how post-secondary institutions are going to try and fix this problem, should they be able to?
Thank you, Kate. Who would like to respond?
That's a tough one.
If I can just comment about the genie in the bottle comment, I always say, get rid of it, get another bottle, because we have to recreate how it's going to be on a go-forward basis. I'll leave it to Gary and the others to talk about the educational, the university aspect, but never think that just because things look like it's changed so much that it's impossible for us to restore our privacy and our freedom. We can always do that, but we have to embrace different solutions.
Yeah. So Tim, if you don't mind, I'm going to take another question. Thank you, Kate, for that, just so that we can move on and give everyone a chance. From Medierson, Maya, can you, let's see, let me find her in the series. Medicine Maya, okay. So would you like to ask your question? Is it Maya, I guess? Is that your last name first and first name second, maybe?
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate of this webinar. My question is how you are dealing with cheating, impersonation, and plagiarism, because it is very difficult to control in remote delivery. University, after moving to the online model, universities are facing, colleges and universities are facing this problem, and they are not getting to control, because how you control someone that is doing an online test and not using a second screen to copy the answers from the internet. So I'm a professor as well. I'm a PhD in communication, and I'm a founder of a startup that helps universities and colleges to ensure that students are not hiring surrogates to do that. And I'm following the conversation and, about the privacy that is very important. So just to clarify that we are not like the company that harvests data. So we are a company that only just validate identity. So that is a reason why I'm questioning you, just because I'm interested to understand how the market is dealing with.
Thank you. Maybe who would like to take that, Gary or Yasmin or?
Well,
go ahead, Ron, please.
Oh, Ron, yeah.
Well, I'll give, Gary can give us the high level view, and I'll give you the street level view. And the street level view is that I noticed a peculiar phenomenon where I was teaching the same course in one instance live and in the other instance online, and everybody in the online course was very, very smart and did very, very well, and everybody in the live class did as you would expect. Some very well, some not so well, and so on. And then this last term, just before the classes ended because of the pandemic, we talked about I talked with my live class about putting courses online, that will run the thing online. And I said, we do this in the other course. And 5 students standing around me just blurted out spontaneously, everybody cheats in online courses all the time about everything. So I think that this is, there have been different ways in which this occurred over the years. But one of the more recent things that I've found, we have Safe Assign and things like that review papers that come in. But one of the things that I saw just by accident, I was looking at a thing and my name came up and I followed the link and it went to Ron Srigley Essays. And I thought, oh, someone's aggregating my papers. They're not aggregating my papers. There's a site, Study Bay, that students can go to and punch in my class or classes, and immediately you punch in what the paper is, you punch in the topic, and immediately offers come in from people guaranteed to write you an A paper, guaranteed to include no plagiarism.
Wow.
And then I realized when I hit that link, there were link after link after link after link of precisely these companies that are now, because for years, all you had to do is cut and paste something that sounded odd, put it in a server, and you would find the source of the plagiarism. But increasingly, it became very difficult to do that. And then I realized now that this is one of the preferred ways. Papers run, a B is going to run you about $40. An A from a 5-star supplier is going to run more into the $70 to $80 range, and they even have reviews. Stuart got the paper to me right on time, and it was excellent, and I got exactly the A that I was wanting. So amazing. This is I think something so profound. It's a very good question. I think this is something so profound that a lot of faculty and a lot of administration have been
yes,
unwilling to probably take as clear a look at the situation as it might mandate.
Wow.
any feedback?
I can jump in, or did you want to go to a next question, or I can jump in?
No, please. I'd love to.
I just have a quick point about this, and Ron, it's something that is a narrative that is understood across, colleges and universities. Thank you for your story. And to think about it from the design perspective. And so for faculty to design their courses that would allow for students to engage in a way that would decrease the frequency of cheating. And so this has to do with the innovative design of online learning. And so when I hear about, how can we, and thank you for your question, how can we mitigate it? It's more of a reactive response to, okay, students are cheating, what are we going to do about it? Versus working with faculty, because it's relatively new, especially during COVID. Now, as a mother, I have a 9 and 11-year-old that is online, but they grew up with the internet in their hands. And so I think that now we have to reconceptualize how we think about the design of online learning environments, because our students are different. And, even the new normal in higher education is they have access to information and can cheat a lot more easily, as Ron has just described, than the student of the past. And so I think that that's really critical on how can we build capacity of our faculty, and even for our higher educational administrators, to design courses that would prevent or at least minimize. And being as a doctorate being in my doctorate as well, I think, again, I'm thinking about the design of that course, that there are artificial intelligence like Turnitin that can really, disseminate who's cheating and who's not as well. And I do think AI is something that we can look into even further, not only from the reactive catching, but from the design perspective.
Yeah, Gary. Yeah.
And you know, this has been one that I've really struggled with. And I do understand in the education system, as we've constructed it with exams and so on, that we've really focused on cheating. In other parts of you know, in careers and other parts of the world, we might call the same behaviors resourceful. So in the workplace, very often, if we look around to think about if we have employees who are able to connect with other people, to think through different ways to solve a problem, pull lots of opinions together, synthesize that. Well, that's really high-end activity, and that would be a very effective employee, and would probably compliment them and give them a wonderful performance review for the way they work. I think there's a problem in the fact that we do look at our students this way. We're trying to measure them as individual units in what they've accomplished. And we actually do look at it negatively as cheating, and I think this does affect students when we look at it as our job as faculty and universities is to prevent them from these behaviors, which, as I mentioned, could be conceptualized as good in another context. But it's kind of a negative response. And building on Yasmin's comments, I think we can design our courses, our learning experiences in such a way that we do emphasize other types of demonstrations of learning that are less susceptible to simply getting an answer from somebody else. So I think it is a good reflective point, and frankly, you know, stated here, if we do a lot less examination type work in the future, I think that'll be a good thing for education.
Mm-hmm. So what sort of work are you thinking about? Is it, I mean, because group projects are not always a possibility in every type of class. What, can you be a bit more specific about that redesign that you have in mind for some who are not doctorates in education?
Well, sure, but there are different ways to do tests if we're going to do it without proctoring kind of these safeguards against cheating. But moving it back, you do get into things like constant participation, which is something if we can monitor, and perhaps AI can help us with this, to monitor how often do students participate, in what ways do they participate in particular activities. But there are also some results that we could do with essays or even preparing videos or other sources of communication where they creatively try to persuade around a point. And we do look at their ability to do this. I think things like this, if we begin to try to pay attention to them and measure them, do actually push our students to a higher standard and higher levels and types of learning. And it does give us a real look at their potential in terms of workplaces, going on to further study, and so on. But I kind of almost bristle at the talk of really describing us as our main goal is to prevent our students from cheating. I would like us to shift the conversation to other ways of looking at the ways that they demonstrate their learning.
Yeah, but it seems like that is a very major challenge for universities because, as you're saying, and as you were saying, Yasmin, it's really reinventing the way of teaching, at least for online. Now, I think we had a discussion with Ron. I wonder if one of the future evolutions is not a large majority of students going online, but a minority remaining in the sort of, if I can use the term, old school type of in-person delivery, where there's room for discussion and yeah, so that's just an idea, but I'm not sure we want to go there right now. I want to get to some other questions. I don't know if you want to read that touch on other topics. I know there's something related to technology and maybe Abby. Should we unmute Abby so that she can ask her question? Yeah. Hi, Abby. You can talk if you want to.
Oh, I'm not sure. My question went way back. So
yes, well, you were asking about the parallel between exams.
oh yeah, this was I mean I guess the conversation has moved on a little about exams, so I don't know if it's as
Okay.
important, but certainly in terms of the future of learning would be really interesting too. But yeah, I mean I think some of that has been covered by what the panelists have been saying. But thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll jump in here, Carolyn. I want to, Catherine Weber has asked several good questions, and I would suggest we give her a chance to ask her most pressing of the ones given the conversation. So
Yes.
Catherine, I've just unmuted you, and you're welcome to turn your camera on if you wish, but do say hello and pose a question.
Hi, I actually wasn't expecting to be asked. I taught in the US, and I'm actually surprised at the conversations that are occurring because online learning in the US has been around very long. When I was at as a faculty member almost 10 years ago, I'm currently in Canada doing something else, but it just seems the conversations has kind of swayed as to, I was expecting it to be a little different and to receive a little bit more guidance as to what are the best practices and strategies for the new normal.
Definitely, we do that. Yeah, we want to talk about that as well. But. And
what, for example, as someone who is trying to re-enter the higher education system here in Canada, do any of your institutions have online webinars or workshops that are available to other faculty members or resources that we can glean from so that we can be more effective as we go in into the classrooms moving forward, especially those of us that are re-entering, because that obviously is a different ball game, the environment, the culture, etc. So in a nutshell, I guess that those kind of it captures all my questions. Thank you.
Gary or Yasmin, probably, did you want to?
I'll just quickly say that, you know, I appreciate your question, and I know that the United States is advanced in very different ways, and, you know, and I think that one of the things that is critical is that we've learned even more during COVID-19 is creating resources for faculty that they're easily able to access that are built in within existing resources. So one of the things that the college did create is just a hub within our learning management system on academic continuity. And one of the things the GCI team did was teaching during unprecedented times. And so I think that that was critical for faculty to enhance their learning environments through things like globally networked learning. So we offered this as a session to faculty, and globally networked learning is it's an opportunity for faculty to connect with faculty in another location, in global location, industry leaders using digital technology. And the college embarked on this a couple of years ago, but because now everyone in the world in the university is mostly online, a lot of people are, this increases an opportunity for students to engage with thought leaders on various parts of the world, with community leaders, local community leaders. And just to give you an example, because I know that you're searching, is we've done sessions on mental health with the University of West Indies, and we do have a Caribbean population here. And the students sincerely appreciated hearing the perspectives of mental health as not only from a Canadian perspective, but to disrupt the biases in which they grew up in other countries, and very much appreciated. We talked about things like food activism. We had somebody from Doctors Without Borders in our nursing program. And so I think that one of the things that is critical is to maximize these opportunities of where we are, that COVID has allowed us to do, and enhance the learning environment, which again are true to our values as Canadians, but also within our institutions.
And I know Gary you have a program that directly addresses Catherine's question as well, I think, right?
Yeah, and we've had a number of different groups at Ryerson who have responded to this. So the Chang School is one. We're primarily responsible for online learning. We have a Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching that's been involved, and I'm on a Keep Teaching task force. That we have a working group in the university that is really trying to support faculty in the transition. So we have a couple of short courses that we do. One is to prepare our instructors for completely online learning. Another is really focused on remote learning, which involves conversions. It's a shorter program. And I really have to give a huge shout out to faculty here. We have been overwhelmed by interest in these programs internally. We originally set up to serve about 350 faculty members, and we were overwhelmed by registration in these short courses. And currently we have about 750 who are actively pursuing these courses to prepare. And you know, what's clear is they care very deeply about their courses and their students, and they're trying their best to prepare. This is a very new thing for many, many faculty. To kind of finish, and maybe the question about would this be available outside? In our case, yes, we are thinking about beginning to do more of this and make it available to those outside the institution. For now, we've had our hands more than full just trying to deal with internal matters of this preparation. But we do hope very soon to be doing a bit of a pivot to support anyone externally. It's also to help people who are trying to get into teaching in higher education now. This has suddenly become a basic skill to have some experience with online teaching and learning. And we have a particularly high demand from those who are seeking opportunities to teach in higher education. And we're anxious to try to support them as well.
All right, and I think in the Q&A, there's responses also to Catherine's question that was given by one of the attendees as well, with another resource online. Tim, could we hear from Catherine Halpern, because I think she has some great questions on really rethinking the experience of teaching in the online context.
Absolutely, she was next on my list too. Oh, Catherine, right. I've allowing you to speak. Please say hello. Sorry, I don't think I allowed you to. Let's try that again. That didn't quite work. Catherine Halpern, there we go.
Ah, there she is.
No, she's still muted.
There we go. Hello?
Ah.
Can you hear me? This is actually Jason Halpern. I'm Catherine's husband.
Okay.
Sorry, I had her log in, so it says I'm her the whole time. Yeah, no, I've had some, I've never taught online, but I taught higher ed for a long time, and I actually went through the online certification training at a previous institution. I tend to think of it as you know, we've got some of the more direct examples of turning in a paper online or delivering a lecture online or things of that, but what are experiences that some of the panel members have had in overseeing courses that really, in the traditional model, rely on hands-on work, like laboratory science classes? I taught film production, and I've taught studio art as well. And so, either what tools have you seen that have been utilized? What rethought approaches have faculty members or departments utilized in those realms? And sort of how have the learning outcomes and the goals of the courses had to adapt to an online version?
That's a great question. Mm-hmm.
I can give a quick example. Thank you for your question. Especially being from a college, it is an applied learning environment. And a quick example is we do have a School of Hospitality and Culinary Arts. And so there are pastry staffs and there are culinary chefs that are teaching students how to work in the kitchen in various realms. And so the faculty members have been outstanding and setting up their own portals where they are engaging students in virtual cooking shows. And so one of the things that they have to ensure, again, is that there has to be a modification because you have access to various appliances when you're in the live face-to-face learning environment, and also getting the ingredients for the recipes would also be challenging. And so they went through that modification, but it's something that students are embracing. One of our students was actually, you know, interviewed at CBC. It is challenging, and it is met with challenge, but the faculty have had to utilize technology and really put themselves out there in order for that engagement, and especially that emotional connection, and to allow themselves to provide feedback and see their students doing this work in their own homes, and then making accommodations for students that are not able to. So that, and overall, that has been really positive within our culinary arts school.
Did you want to add anything, Gary, or?
I'll share a quick example. This has been a real, you know, this was really one of the points that I think, you know, many departments at universities struggled with about how to carry on, you know, studio work and performance work, but also laboratories and so on. And it's been a really interesting area of innovation. And I'll just give you one example from our Faculty of Science at Ryerson University. They began to work with the designers, and I think I have all of this right, of Fortnite, an online game, to basically begin to create virtual labs that they could utilize for students. And it's a very exciting area of work that they're involved in, and I can't wait to see the first examples of it. But you know, we also have had the same challenges in our Faculty of Communication and Design. And they're thinking very innovatively about how they take aspects of their programming that would involve studio, performance, and so on, and certain workspaces and equipment requirements. This has been a very challenging part of it, but we are beginning to see these people who work in it come up with some very innovative solutions that I think provide exciting opportunities for the future, even for the time when we're more so back on our campuses. I think many of these ideas will continue to flourish.
Did you, Jason, did you want to add to that? But I guess, or are you personally confronted with having to do that, or are you not having to go?
At the moment, I am lucky to not be teaching at this moment. So I get to watch from the outside as everybody navigates this.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Maybe I could just ask a question. Is the plan at Ryerson, for example, and at Centennial, is the plan that this is, you know, an extraordinary activity in order to keep the programs floating, but the assumption that everything will go back to live classes once it's safe enough to do so? Is that the assumption?
I think in general, yes. But I think aligned with the title of this presentation, I think there will be a new normal. So everybody is very anxious to get back to campus, and there's a great deal of planning to do just that in a safe way. But you know, my prediction, and I'd be interested in what Yasmin says about it in her experience, is yes, we will go back when it is safe to do so, but I don't think things will be quite the same. I think there are many learnings in this, both how we would conduct our in-class courses, but I must say, as a unit that works fully online, I expect we've learned some things, and we will design our online courses differently, seeing what has happened in the last while. So I think everything will have some shifts.
Yeah. I think that's, you know, I think that's where we get into the nitty-gritty of it, because what is understood to be desirable, or what is understood to be best for the students. And I mean, the technology is here, and it's here to stay. And clearly, from everything you're saying, Gary, and Yasmin is saying, that there are better and worse ways of doing this. There are people that do these programs, and you know, they're things that don't work, they're not successful. But I'm always concerned about the I'm always concerned, you know, I guess, you know, von Neumann's general concern about technology, basically that the danger in technology is intrinsic, always. So there are good things that it brings, but there are always bad things that it brings. And this is an inescapable structure. So I think there's a kind of sobriety in that I find pretty refreshing and pretty important, actually, in terms of how we go about doing these things and what we upload and what we don't upload. And so I think it's important not simply to, I'm probably more on the critic side. So it's good just to be honest about that. But I think it's important for people like me not to be open to things that are working, that are good. I have colleagues that do this work, and I see things that are happening that are good, right? They're valuable and so on. But I also worry about the well, a number of things. But let me just put one. I worry about the disappearance of the local.
Of a what? Of a? I'm sorry.
Of the local.
Local. Yep.
So there's a lot of business about, oh, well, if you take an online course, you can be in a room with, Gad Horowitz at University of Toronto, if it was years ago or something, or you can be with the stars. And I think that there's a very real part of learning and a real part of understanding that is local. There's being in the room with a faculty member and you're living in a place and people understanding that place and illustrating what's going on in the material by talking about being in that place. And this sort of universalization of things, I think is again, has its benefits, but I also think it has its limitations. And I would note, since you mentioned the article, Caroline, one of the things, and also from my own work, one of the things that's happening is, if you look at the premier institutions in North America, they are not going to offer their programs to their elite students in this way. Those people are going to be sitting in rooms, small classes with dedicated faculty members who are very, very good. I'm not suggesting in any way that faculty members who teach online are not very good. Of course they are, but I'm saying that they put them in rooms with these people and they spend time, and all the cues and things that happen when people are together, all of that is present, and that's how they're educating their children. They're not putting them in MOOCs, right? They're not doing anything of the sort. So I think it's also not that I want to valorize the elite or to condemn them or to commend them. But I remember this quotation that really stuck with me in the New York Times a few years ago about Steve Jobs saying that, he doesn't give his own kids all that stuff, iPads and phones and stuff. When they sit at the dinner table, they sit at the dinner table. So I was watching The Wire at the time, and I just remembered this line from one of the characters where he says, "Don't get high on your own supply." I just thought.
That's Notorious B.I.G., Ron. It's a rap lyric.
Thank you.
I love it. I love it.
I think, Ron, you're also influenced. We really haven't gotten into the different disciplines, but I think Ron comes from the philosophy and humanities teaching point of view, which is very important to point out in this conversation. I think you can understand.
But if I could add, I totally agree with Ron. I totally agree with Ron. And my discipline was different. I studied psychology and the law and criminology, but there was something essential about those connected real live sessions where you could have the most amazing in-depth conversations and go into areas you couldn't predict, and that interaction, it was just heavenly. I learned so much. And I mean, I did all the reading. I was really worked hard. But what I gleaned the most was from those live interactions and the unexpected areas we went into. And it was heaven to me. So I really hope we don't lose that online, that actual connected live sessions in terms of classes.
Yeah. And I think,
can I say just one thing to comment on that, if that's okay? And I think it's a really interesting point, Ron and Anne. And what I really appreciate now about the new normal in higher education is people are talking about micro-credentials. People are talking the way that the university and college structure has not changed from having a professor and having the students. It has remained the same for a very, very long time. And while institutions have embraced things like decolonization, looking at indigenization, looking at indigenous ways of knowing, and looking even at the co-creation of new knowledge, because even the knowledge in which that we are sharing within our classrooms right now is being examined and is being, you know, revisited and reviewed, because it is often riddled with bias or often missing large aspects of information, just because of how knowledge was constructed to omit the voices of the marginalized. And so I think it's important when we're engaging in this discussion, and I think it's important to hold on to those, you know, ideologies of education, but for us to continue and use this time, you know, during COVID to realize there can be a new normal. And I have to agree with my colleague Gary in that we are learning that some students really like learning online. They really like how it gives them the flexibilities as a parent, as somebody, as an international student who has to do 3 jobs, or, you know, and I can't even conceive being in a classroom right now with 2 kids and, you know, working, but I'm so grateful that I have this opportunity. So I do hope, again, going back, and I hope I'm paraphrasing or quoting you right, Gary, around that reconceptualization that now higher educational professionals and faculty are even more required to think about in order to meet students, current students, where they.
And if I might jump in too, and thank you, Ron, for bringing up the point. I think it's actually a critical point to consider here. You're right. Any method that we use needs to be looked at in terms of what we gain from it, but also what we lose or the problems that we create. And online, and particularly the things we're doing very quickly now, are no exception. But I think we also have to be, and I think this comes back to Yasmin's point, we have to be as critical about the traditional practices that we've engaged in, about what some of the strengths and weaknesses of those practices were as well. I too, some of my most wonderful education memories were in classrooms and face-to-face areas, but I also have had some wonderful experience that have been online mediated. And I think we're at a good point where we can subject all of our options, because what we've gotten is not a choice where we have to choose the online way or the classroom way. We've gotten more options, and we do have the ability to do things like include more people in education and try to include them in meaningful ways. So I think we've just gained, you know, I'm not sure if this is a great metaphor in all ways, but our toolbox in terms of the options that we have has gotten much bigger as a result of this. And now it's our responsibility to critically go forward and consider, you know, how we best use all of those options that we have available to us. And this has really given us an immersion or a crash course in online learning, which I think gives us an incredible opportunity to consider how it can enhance education and the way we provide it, and the way we solve some of our problems, like inequities that have always been there in education. There are opportunities.
It's true. And I agree with Gary as well, because also it enables your reach to be far greater. One of the things I love about the online course I teach at Ryerson is I have people who have subscribed to the class from all over the world, from Europe, from Japan, from South Africa, from, you know, it's wonderful being able to reach all of these people and have a convergence of views and exchange of ideas and things like that. So there's no question, it expands our reach. I'm just hoping we can do both and have the live sessions as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think there's something important to say. Oh, we're going to have to close soon. Thank you so much for all your contributions. It was just incredible. I'm not sure we got to everyone's questions, but I think we got the gist of them. I think in conclusion, you know, apart from the privacy issues that I think should not be forgotten, and I think one of the attendees was asking about that again, and that making universities accountable and even just online offerings accountable basically on this privacy issue, which we tend to forget. There's a big issue of how do you do online learning well, I guess, if you are going to be going to online learning. It doesn't mean that you're going to lose the offline interaction completely, but there seem to be best practices that need to be put in place so that online doesn't equate to automated learning, basically
Right.
to industrialized learning. I think that's the big fear. And hopefully you are representatives of institutions that are thinking about how to avoid that. But I think it's important to explain that to potential students who may not understand the difference between an online offering that is very well marketed and that seems very easy to sign up to and inexpensive, and an offering from a bricks and mortar institution that maybe has in mind privacy, quality of student interaction, and other issues. So I hope this discussion has helped sparked something among our attendees. Thank you so much. And we will have an excerpt available thanks to Dina, who will piece together some short sequences after this. I think we will close now. I don't have anything else to add at this point. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Caroline, I'll just, yes, thanks. A big hearty thanks to all of the panelists for their contributions. It's been, and to all of you who signed up as participants. The chat box, the questions raised have been fantastic and a really rich discussion. And I thank all of you for, although we didn't get a chance to have you ask all of your questions, they were, it was great to see the responses that others were making in the Q&A and in the chat box to them. So thank you for all of that. And we look forward to seeing you again at another eSalon.
Great.
Thank
Thank you.
Thanks very much for inviting us.
Thank you. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Enjoy.
Nice meeting you all.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
You too, Anne.
Pleasure.